Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you. Although I can't see you all, I know that you're all there. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join me to talk about EPR. I know kind of as we've come into the new years, we've entered 2022, there's a lot of legislation changes, there's a lot of new things going on. I hope that this evening we'll be able to clear a lot of that up for you. This will run for about 45 minutes, got about 20 minutes worth of presentation, and then we'll have the chance to do some Q&A. I'd ask if you do have questions, if you could pop them in the Q&A section on Zoom. I know we've all been stuck inside for the past 2 years or so, so hopefully using Zoom should be second nature to you all now. It definitely is for me. But yeah, we'll get started. If you do have any questions, just pop them in the box and then we will get to them at the end. So welcome everybody to our EPR presentation. My name is Ellie and I am the EPR program lead here at AVASK. We have a team of language speakers who will be able to assist you throughout the entire process of the registration, the filing, and just to answer any general questions as well. So moving on to what is EPR? EPR stands for Extended Producer Responsibility, and although this is a new thing, in the EU, it's a new thing for your OMPs, it's a new thing for us. It's not a new thing overall. It originally started in 1988 in Sweden and is now being rolled out across the EU, starting with the French and German markets. This environmental policy essentially requires producers to take responsibility for the entire life cycle of the products that they're putting onto the market, including their eventual disposal. By taking responsibility, you as a producer would be required to pay eco contributions, which is essentially a fancy environmental way of saying taxation, to fund the sustainable disposal of the products themselves. The ultimate goal of this is then to encourage a more economical approach to packaging, reducing waste, and encouraging more reprocessing and recycling of materials to higher quality secondary goods. Under these EPR updated regulations, the liable entities must alleviate environmental impacts of their products throughout their entire product life cycle. So who does it cover? The producer is the party who first places the good onto the market subject to EPR requirements. As I mentioned, it's currently only applicable for the German and the French markets, and you are considered a producer of these goods subject to EPR requirements if you manufacture a product subject to these requirements in Germany or France, you're importing a product subject to EPR requirements into either of those countries, or if you're selling a product subject to EPR requirements into those countries. If you are a producer of the products in the scope of these requirements, you'll be obliged to provide a registration number unique to EPR onto your online marketplaces. Now, these registration numbers cover all online marketplaces. So if you're selling on Amazon and eBay, for example, this same number can be used across your online marketplaces. So essentially, the producer requirements cover a large scope of sellers, much like yourselves. Essentially, anybody selling onto an OMP, like Amazon, like eBay, you will have an obligation to register. Let's just move on to a couple of circumstances for registration. So if you're a producer of the goods, so if you're importing, manufacturing, or selling into Germany or France, and you do not have an EPR registration number, you will be required to register to obtain one. On the rare occasion that you're not considered a producer of these goods and you're selling products subject to EPR requirements, you are able to obtain the applicable EPR registration number from your upstream supplier and then provide the online marketplace with the appropriate registration number as proof of your compliance. However, the likelihood is that if you're getting your goods from a large upstream supplier, the likelihood is they're not going to be passing that number down to each person that that's buying from them. So if that is not possible and you're not able to obtain the EPR registration number from your upstream supplier, you will need to register for the numbers yourself. Much like with VAT, your OMPs will be obliged to suspend you from posting non-compliant items under the EPR product categories. So although you will be selling, you have lots of products on the market, if you're not registered for EPR, your overall sales for the year of 2022 or moving forward, if you're not compliant, these are going to be majorly affected. So moving on, I mentioned the product categories earlier. So these EPR requirements do not just cover products that you're selling individually. So it's not like if I'm selling socks, there's a sock category. These are the categories that they fall into. France, there are 9 categories. We have packaging, electronic and electronic equipment, batteries, furniture, tires, paper, textiles, and they've just introduced 2 new ones, chemicals and piercing medical equipment. And then for Germany, we also have packaging, electronic and electronic equipment, and batteries. So it's worth noting that if you're selling goods into these markets, you may be required to register for more than one number itself. So an example of this would be if I was selling mobile phones. If I was selling a mobile phone into France and selling a mobile phone into Germany, I would need to register for 3 different EPR registration numbers, one for packaging, one for electrics, and one for batteries. Now, because these categories exist in both countries, I would need 6 registration numbers overall. So that's 3 in France and 3 in Germany. Kind of another, a bit more rogue example of this is if I was selling Christmas jumpers with, I know we're a bit past Christmas now, but if you were going to be selling Christmas jumpers in the next couple of months that had flashing lights on them, or the great ones that everybody really wants, the ones with the flashing lights, or the ones that play the music. For France, you would need to be registered for packaging, textiles, electrics, and batteries, just purely because it contains all of those things. Now with packaging, I'm not talking about if I'm selling cardboard, I'm talking about the packaging, so the primary packaging that surrounds your goods. Moving on to the next slide. So what can AVASK do to help you? Essentially, myself and the team, we run a service here at AVASK in order to help you get set up and compliant in France and Germany for EPR. We have a registration one-time fee this requires us registering you with the relevant producer responsibility organization. Now, these are kind of like your EPR tax offices, as it were. So each category has a different organization, and each registration number comes directly from those organizations themselves. We also then have a reporting, which we need to do, that comes at an annual fee. This involves a declaration of sales of the products that you're selling, covered by the different EPR categories, to the respective PROs for their applicable reporting periods. Now, your filing occurs either monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending on the country and the category. The most frequent occurrence that we're seeing with filings is annually. So what we would do is at the point of registration, you would need to provide a forecasted filing for the year of 2022. And then at the end of the year, we would look back on what you've actually sold in 2022, and then we would your contribution amount would then be adjusted. For authorized representation, we also offer this. There is at an annual fee, and this is only required for electrics registration in Germany and France for non-domestic sellers. So essentially, they just require a presence in either Germany or in France for your business in order to register for this. We provide that, that representation. We can do that for you for that one specific category that require it. For all pricing structures, please feel free to reach out and email the team, and we'll be happy to go through anything regarding what categories you fall into. This is purely because it works on a case-by-case basis. So you're all selling different things, you're all selling into different markets. So it's just easier to work through this on a case-by-case basis rather than bombard you with loads of prices right now. Moving on to the payment of the eco contributions. Now, as I mentioned before, this is kind of a dressed up way of essentially saying, a minimal taxation. Businesses must pay these eco contributions to the relevant PROs in accordance with their reporting. So like I mentioned before, this is most likely be annually. I think the only difference is with the electrics categories in both countries, you have to provide a monthly filing as well, but that's only with electric. So the eco contributions are then defined slightly differently than you might be already used to when you're paying your VAT. This is not done at a percentage. This is done purely on the EPR product category that you're selling in, the device type, the product attributes, and the number or the weight of units sold within the EPR category. So essentially, if we take packaging, for example, you would provide us with the information of how many units you forecast that you're going to be selling into one of the countries or both of the countries for the year of 2022. We'd ask for your net packaging weight. So this is the packaging weight of the cardboard or the cellophane or the plastics in which you're putting your goods into. And then we'd essentially just times the units by the net weight of the packaging, and then the authorities would calculate a contribution based on this. Although I wouldn't be able to kind of offer any sort of ballpark figures based on what kind of contributions you would be making, because it all kind of goes on a case-by-case basis, because you're all selling different units, you're all selling different weights of packaging. I would just assure you all that these are not bank-breaking figures by any means. They are purely based on the volume of the sales that you're making. They're not there to deter you from selling. They're essentially just a way of making you as sellers aware of how to sell more sustainably. For example, 50 kilos worth of cardboard would incur a lesser contribution amount than 50 kilos of plastics, for example. It's just they're levied on a way of what's better for the environment, what's easier to recycle. It's just making you aware of how to sell more sustainably. So maybe next year when you look at your packaging for your goods, you might want to adjust it to sort of incur a slightly lesser amount of contribution. Moving on to the next slide. So deadlines, everybody's favorite. So for France, you're probably all aware that the deadline for being compliant on Amazon France or on your OMPs for France was the 1st of January 2022. We're very lucky that France came first, because I think they are slightly more lenient when it comes to compliance, especially from sort of the Amazon side. They have been a lot more lenient as opposed to if we had had the deadline for Germany first. As I mentioned earlier, OMPs are well within their rights to remove listings that are non-compliant. So the necessity for registering in France is definitely still there, regardless of their leniency at the moment, because the likelihood is that although January the 1st was the deadline, they are going to be cracking down on compliance very, very soon. Something definitely to be aware of is 1st of July 2022 for packaging in Germany and the 1st of January 2023 for electrics in Germany. What I would say is that registration processing times for Germany, although July seems miles and miles away, and we're all looking forward to our summer holidays in July, but we also need to start looking forward to EPR registration deadlines, because processing times for registrations are currently ranging between 1 week to about 10 to 12 weeks at the moment, dependent on the category. So the necessity to register now is definitely there, because with volume coming in at the moment, these registration times are only going to get bigger. What I will say is that regardless of the way that you're shipping these goods, you still have the necessity to register. It's not about what you're shipping. So if you're using like self-ship solutions or FBA, it's not about how you're shipping the goods. It's not about how these goods are moving around these different countries. It's about the goods that you're putting onto the market. If you're selling, if you're importing, or if you're manufacturing in these countries, then you will need you will have a requirement to register. I would also kind of something to just keep in the back of your minds as well is that although Germany and France have jumped on the bandwagon very early with this, this does not mean that they are exclusive in this. That the likelihood of this expanding across the EU in the next 5 to 10 years is very, very high. I think there's talks about definitely Austria is looking into this, Spain is looking into this. So I think it's just something to be very aware of right now. Although it's new, I think this is going to be around for a very long time. So just bear that in mind when this is all setting up. It's just going to be another additional step for you guys as sellers when you're looking to sell into the EU itself. So that is kind of a whistle-stop tour of EPR itself. As I said at the beginning, please do drop me some questions in the Q&A box. I can see we've got a couple already, but if you did want to get in touch with the team at all, my details are down here, my email address, and we also have our team email address down the bottom as well to reach out to the team. As I said, we have lots of language speakers, so we are able to cater to all of you that may not feel comfortable with English as your first language and would rather speak to somebody else in those languages as well. So please do ask questions, because I know that 2022 and 2023 are throwing up lots of curveballs for everybody. So we are here to help. We are here to assist you with everything. So please do get in touch. Let's have a look at some of these questions. See what we can find. Perfect. Amazing. Thank you so much for sending through all of your questions. Let's have a look at what we've got. There's nowhere on Amazon to input an EPR registration number for France, only Germany. This is correct. I think this kind of ties into what I was saying before about, although the deadline for the registrations was January the 1st, I think France, especially Amazon, are being a lot more lenient. I think you may have, if you're selling in France, you may have got a message from them a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas, saying that they are not going to be cracking down on compliance from January the 1st. And it may have been worded in the way that it looked like they were going to be paying on your behalf. The likelihood is this, and I've had a lot of questions about this over the last couple of weeks, is that they will not be paying for your EPR registration numbers long term. I think it's just the case of January the 1st came around very, very quickly. There's a lot still to for everybody to get their heads around. They're kind of giving an unofficial 3 to 4 month grace period, as it were, in order for everybody to kind of get registered before they do then crack down on compliance. The likelihood is that they wouldn't necessarily do this kind of out the goodness of their heart. They would then ask you to reimburse them moving forwards. So it's just something to bear in mind. Although they've kind of put this this into place for you, this doesn't mean that you're then covered. The necessity to register is definitely still very much there. I would say that they're kind of on their way with being able to provide you the platform like Germany have in order to input your registration number for France. But definitely Germany are very much there, and they're already kind of cracking down on compliance already, just really pushing people to get registered, because I think with VAT as well, Germany's very hot on compliance. I think just across the board, they're really cracking down on compliance this year. So thank you for your question. Is it necessary to be registered for VAT in France and Germany? This is not a necessity. Essentially, at the point of registration, as long as you are registered in the, as long as you have a registered number in the EU, you are able to register for EPR. This is essentially because of OS and IOS and all those other things that kind of don't require you to have a VAT number in every single country. It would be very difficult for EPR regulations to be like, okay, well, you have to have a VAT number in this country, but then you've also enrolled in OS and IOS and that kind of thing. So I think as long as you're registered in the EU and you have a VAT ID in the EU, it is possible to register you for EPR. Let's have a look. What's the difference between primary and secondary packaging? Okay, so for primary packaging, this is essentially the goods that you are, the packaging that you're wrapping your goods in. So for example, if I was selling face cream and the face cream was in a pot, the pot is then part of that good. But if I was to then put that in an additional box, that will be part of the primary packaging. Another thing to take into account is that from July the 1st, 2022, the EPR regulations then extend to your secondary packaging as well. So what would happen is we need to take into account when we're doing this forecasted filing right at the very beginning, to then release your registration number, we need to take into account the secondary packaging that you're selling as well. So what we would do is we'd essentially take the dimensions of your product, and then we would, Amazon have set carton sizes. So they have, for example, they have small, medium, and large. We'd look at the product that you're selling and assess whether it would then fit into a small carton, a medium carton, a large carton. And then we'd need to take that into account for the forecasted filing that you do. Obviously, with the forecasted filing, this is just an estimate. You're not tied to this data in any way. This is just, when we ask for your forecasted data, I would very much base it kind of on what you did in 2021. I know it was a very strange year for everybody. It was a very different year for selling. However, you don't know what's going to happen in 2022, and I think we can only estimate. So these contributions that you pay at the point of the forecasted filing would then be adjusted when you do the actual filing for 2022 in 2023. So if you're paying, for example, you're paying for the contribution now and you pay over the amount because 2022 is not, you're not selling as many units into these different countries, or your circumstances change, what would happen is that the organizations would then credit you for the following year. And if you paid slightly under and then you had a really successful year in 2022, they would then ask you to pay the difference, essentially. So with the secondary packaging, the likelihood is that because we need to take into account a full year for the forecasted filing, the likelihood is for the secondary packaging, you might be paying slightly over, or if your Amazon's boxes do change sort of size, or they do opt for different packaging, you're just then covered and you are still going to be compliant moving forward. That's kind of the difference between primary and secondary packaging. The primary packaging is very much your own and you're very much in control of that. And then the secondary packaging would be the packaging that your OMP is putting your goods into. Thank you very much for that question. Let's have a look. I think that kind of, there's another question here saying, if I'm using FBA, why do I have to do EPR? Amazon are the ones packaging it. This is very true. And if your goods do not have any direct packaging themselves, as I mentioned, you do have to take into account the secondary packaging as well. So pretty much everybody who is selling onto an online marketplace will have a packaging obligation. Let's have a look. Lovely. Are there any packaging components that do not fall under EPR registrations? This answer is no. All components of packaging fall under EPR regulations. So essentially, whether you're using cardboard, if you're using plastics, if you're using cellophanes and stuff like that, all of your packaging, be it primary or secondary, falls under your EPR obligations. Let's have a look. Anything else? That's a very good question. Where do we start? Essentially, we would, if you would like to go ahead with us in the service and we would be of help to you, which we definitely will be, We have a contact sheet on our website, which you can fill out. If you just go to AVASK EPR, if you just type that into Google, it should be the first option that comes up. If you just click on there, there should be a contact sheet in there. Or apart from that, you can email myself, you can email the team, and we'll be happy to get you started. Essentially, I would just reiterate that although deadlines seem very, very far off at the moment, you will need to be registering as soon as possible just to catch those registration times as fast as you can. But yes, we look forward to receiving your registrations. Let's have a look. What else have we got? Will we get the information from today's presentation? So I may have mentioned before, but this webinar will then be on YouTube after this happens. So essentially, you will be able to refer back to this full content. So I will be around on YouTube for many, many years talking about EPR. So if you ever do have any further questions, please do get in touch, but you can refer back to this at any time. Let me see, there's lots of questions kind of that are on the same thing. So I'm hoping that I have answered a lot of them. Let's have a look at this. I'm based in Italy, but have VAT numbers in France and Germany. Will you register for EPR with local VAT numbers or the Italian one? Is there a preferred option? So as long, like I mentioned earlier, as long as you've got an EU VAT ID, you'll be able to register. There's kind of no preference which one we register you with. I know that for French packaging, for example, they do request your the country of incorporation, the VAT ID of your country of incorporation if you are situated in the EU. But this is all requested on the application form. So we kind of ask for all of this information before the registration process starts. So kind of we ask for all your information and then we'll just proceed with what we've got. Let's have a look. Anything else? Thank you so much for all these questions, guys. These are great questions. We're selling in the kitchen category, especially drinking glasses. Are we obliged to register? So for this would fall into the packaging category. So yes, you will have an obligation to register, but you would only fall kind of into the packaging category unless you were to do something crazy and add some batteries to your drinking glasses or some electrics. You would only be falling into the packaging category itself. Obviously, this is something that you need to take into account. If you're selling in Germany and in France, you would then require 2 different EPR registration numbers. But yeah, just packaging. Let me have a look. These are great questions, guys. Thank you very much. Oh, this is a good one. So with packaging, if it's already registered as a recycling material, do I have to register it for EPR? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Kind of EPR is its own legislation in its own right. If you're selling kind of packaging, you're selling goods that are packaged with already recyclable goods, or they're already registered for other kind of recycling schemes and things like that. Unfortunately, it kind of does fall a little bit separately to the schemes that you're already a part of. So EPR is just a whole new legislation in its own right. What does textiles cover? Is this raw fabrics or including bedding and bath towels, etc.? So the textiles category is a little bit interesting, actually. It's essentially like clothing, it's t-shirts, it's trousers, it's like gloves and hats, socks, stuff like that, but it doesn't include the raw materials. So if I was to sell like rolls of material, this would not fall under textiles. It would only be once it's then made into the product itself. With bedding and bath towels, yes, this does fall into textiles. Kind of anything to do with like bed linen, things like that, things that have kind of been made into items do fall under the textiles category, but that is only for France. Let's have a look in both some of these. If I'm registered for EPR and then I add new products, do I have to notify anyone regarding this? So if you're registered for EPR and then you do add new products, because obviously you're looking at the goods that you're projecting that you're going to be selling in 2022. Nobody knows what's going to be happening. If you are adding new products, that's absolutely fine. I would just be aware of what you're adding, essentially. So if you're registered for just packaging and your goods fall into just the packaging category, that's absolutely fine, but you need to ensure that the new goods that you're putting onto the market also just fall into that category. And if they don't fall into just that category, then you will have an obligation to register for more numbers. So for example, if I was to be selling bath towels in France, I would need packaging and textiles. But then if I then decided to sell mobile phones halfway through the year, that's absolutely fine. You're well within your right to do that. However, you would then need to register for the remaining categories, as it were. So then you would need to register for electrics, you would need to register for batteries. It's just kind of being aware of what goods you're putting onto the market. Obviously, you don't have to kind of declare this as we go along through the year. This would all then be captured by your end of year filing. So when we look back at what you sold in 2022, this would then all be kind of taken into account. We'll look at what you've actually put onto the market. But yeah, just something to be aware of, definitely, with putting new goods onto the market, is that you're making sure you're compliant in all kind of categories that you're falling under. Let's have a look at some other questions. Loads of questions, guys. These are great. Thank you very much for sending these in. There's lots of questions about service costs. As I mentioned earlier, if you just drop us an email or drop myself an email, I'll be happy to go through the costs with you. These are kind of on a case-by-case basis at the moment. Obviously, if I'm selling different goods to another seller, for example, that you would then be quoted a different amount. So yeah, just drop me an email. I'll be happy to go through anything with you, but there's no point kind of going through it right now, just because it wouldn't apply to all of you at once. What are the lead times for registrations? Great answer. So great question, sorry. So for Germany at the moment, you're looking between, it's very much dependent on the category, but you're looking at about kind of a week. And then for other categories, you're looking about 10 to 12 weeks. So as I mentioned many times, I'm just going to keep repeating it because it's very much something that we need to take into consideration. These lead times are extending more and more. So the urgency is definitely still there. For France, you're looking at about 1 month to like 4 weeks to 6 weeks at the moment for them to do the processing. So those are kind of the lead times for registrations. What other questions? Let's have a look. These are great questions, guys. Well done. Do we pay on the forecasted amount and then get credited or invoiced, or do we forecast but only pay after the filings of actuals? I touched on this a little bit before, but I'll go into more detail about this. Essentially, with the forecasted filing, what you would do is we'd provide all that information to the authorities. At the point of registration, they would not then release your EPR registration number until that forecasted filing is then paid. So essentially, you'd be looking at paying upfront for the forecasts, but then when we look at the actual reporting kind of a year down the line, that contribution would then just get adjusted. So it will be, as I said, you'll either be credited if you're paying over on your forecast, or you would then just have to pay the difference. They'd kind of invoice you for the difference. Let's have a look. Do a couple more questions. How do I prove that I'm compliant? Great question. So essentially, you'd be looking at uploading your EPR registration numbers to your OMPs. So that's how you would kind of prove your compliance with your OMPs. Once you get this registration number, although I know that France doesn't have the exact page that you're able to upload it at the moment, Germany definitely do. So once that number comes through, if you just upload that, that's you done for compliance. Although you do then have to prove that you're filing these reports and the filings that we do for you. It would just be a case from an OMP perspective, from an Amazon perspective, from an eBay perspective, you're just uploading that number onto your OMP. From an organization, from a PRO, from a kind of French and German authorities perspective, you are then looking at ensuring that the reporting is done within the time frames, and then that's how you're staying compliant on that side. Is it the same agency to register for all categories within France, namely CITEO? So no, each kind of category falls into a different agency. So like I mentioned before, they're kind of like your tax offices, for example, for EPR. So I know that CITEO has been dealing with a lot of packaging. They've kind of also got LECO over in France. CITEO are now more kind of dealing with the graphic paper kind of area, so they're moving away from the packaging slightly. One question that I get asked a lot is, can we take over pre-existing registration numbers? Because I know some of you potentially have already got registration numbers in place, which is absolutely great, but just haven't done the filings. So what we can do is we can take over that number for you, essentially like a transfer. Like if you were transferring from a provider for your VAT number, we take over that number for you, and then we just proceed with the filings themselves. So to kind of answer your question, no, it's not the same agency to register for all categories. They all have completely different ones. But if you were to transfer, say, your registration number, that if you register for packaging with CITEO already and all of our filings go through LECO, you would have received the same registration number from either organization anyway. So we could transfer that number over to the different organization. Let me have a look. Does Poland have an EPR requirement for packaging? No. So at the moment, the requirements are only if you're importing, manufacturing, or selling into Germany or France. When will the sellers know how much percentage EPR contribution will affect a single sale? So this is kind of based on, like I mentioned earlier, it's based on the kind of units and the weight of the goods themselves or the packaging themselves. So when you're looking at percentages, it's very difficult to kind of work out. What I would say is if you're selling into France, for example, and you're selling under 10,000 units into the French market of cardboard, then if you're selling 10,000 units into France and you're packaging those goods into cardboard, you're looking at around a base figure of about 80 euros. So kind of anything over that, you're going to be paying a little bit more. But these are all kind of adjusted accordingly, dependent on the volume of the units that you're selling and also the type of materials that you're using. Anything else? Let me have a look. Do you have to include your EPR registration number on your product or on your packaging? No, there is not an obligation to put the EPR number onto your goods themselves. These just need to be uploaded to your online marketplaces. One thing I would say is with packaging, especially, I would look out for packaging amendments that need to be made. There's additional logos that potentially needs to be added. For France, they definitely have a logo that needs to be updated onto your packaging. This is not an immediate change that needs to happen. So to kind of account for packaging lead times and changes and alterations that need to be made, they've given a deadline of the 1st of January 2023. So this is essentially just adding a very small logo onto your packaging or onto your product to show compliance for France. If you do want more information about that, please do reach out and I'll be happy to go through anything with you. Is there any way I can see which kind of packaging is cheaper and more preferred? There's kind of no way of knowing the exact answer to this. What I would say is that we're looking at cardboard kind of being the most inexpensive, as it were. I would say when you're packaging your goods, think about what is the best way to recycle these goods, how easy are they going to be for people to recycle, and then you'll kind of see the difference in price. If you're selling like everything's wrapped in plastic and then it's put in a plastic box and then it's wrapped in cellophane and stuff like that, then you're going to be incurring a much larger charge than you would if it was just in one cardboard box. As I mentioned before, it's a way of making you guys as sellers more aware of how to package more sustainably, how to sell goods that are more sustainable for the environment. I think a lot of EU countries have large targets to hit before 2030, and they are very much aware that this is a way of making people more aware of the environmental impacts that the selling that you guys selling onto these online marketplaces is having. We'll just have a couple more questions. Let's have a look. How is furniture defined? So furniture is kind of, you're looking at wardrobes, tables, chairs, that kind of thing. Anything that's, I think it's very much bigger picture with these categories. It's looking at kind of your tables and stuff like that. It's anything that you would walk into a shop and go, okay, I would like to buy some furniture. It's very much bigger picture rather than down to kind of the small kind of the nitty gritty details and stuff like that. Let's have a look. Let's do one more question. What if there's a discrepancy in the actual packaging weight and the one filed? So with the one that's filed right at the very beginning, there is, this is just forecasted data. You're not tied to this data. It's very much what you're projecting, what you feel like you're going to be putting onto the market. So at the end of the year, this will then be all adjusted, and you'll be able to, they'll look at your actual data that you're supplying, and you will then pay the contribution based on what you've actually put onto the market. I believe there's a lot in the pipeline with OMPs at the moment when they're looking into supplying sellers much like yourselves with like an actual reporting database. So like your sales reports that you're downloading when you're paying VAT, you'll be able to download specific EPR relevant reporting. So you'll be able to kind of just give us that information straight away, and it will kind of all be readily there for you. So at the point of registration, when we ask for all this forecasted filing, that is the bulk of the work essentially, because we have to send that information off to the authorities. But from a filing perspective, moving forwards, it should be a lot more simple. One thing that I would say is, although, for example, if Amazon are putting this reporting structure into place for you, you do need to take into account all of your off Amazon sales as well. It's not just the sales that you're making on Amazon that are taken into account. You need to account for all the sales that you're making on online marketplaces across 2022 in order to get an accurate contribution calculation and then be compliant moving forwards. Yeah, thank you very much for all of your questions. If there wasn't any questions that I if there were any questions that I didn't answer and you still would like more information, please do feel free to email me or get in touch. I'd be very happy to go through anything with you. I'd like to thank you all for all of your time this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever you are in the world. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that I have cleared a couple of things up for you and you feel like you've got a bit more of a basic knowledge on EPR. Yeah, and I wish you a very successful selling year, and I hope that our paths cross for the registrations, and if you do need anything, please feel free to reach out. Thank you very much, guys, and have a lovely rest of your day.